There are moments in a person's life that begin like any other moment and end by changing everything. Not the moments you prepare for, not the ones you see coming from a distance, the ones you have time to brace yourself against. Those moments are hard enough, but they come with warning. They give you time to arrange your face, to steady your breathing, to become the version of yourself you want to be when the thing arrives. No, the moments that change everything are the ones that find you exactly as you are. In the middle of an ordinary day, doing nothing remarkable, sitting in the shade because the heat is too heavy for anything else. This one began with heat, the kind of heat that settles over the desert at midday like a physical weight pressing down from above. The kind that empties the roads and silences the camps and drives every living creature, man and animal alike, into whatever shadow it can find. The air above the ground shimmers and ripples as if the earth itself is breathing. The horizon dissolves into a pale blur where the sky and the sand become the same color. Sound travels strangely in that heat, or doesn't travel at all. The world contracts to the small circle of shade beneath whatever is overhead, and everything outside that circle feels very far away and not quite real. Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent by the oaks of Mamre. He was 99 years old. The oaks of Mamre were old too, ancient trees whose roots reached deep enough to find water even in the worst of the dry season, whose canopies spread wide enough to offer real shade to anyone who sat beneath them. This was where Abraham had pitched his tent. This was where he had built his altar. This was where he had lived in the years since the covenant of fire. The years of waiting, the years of Ishmael growing tall and strong in the camp, the years of Sarah's face when she thought no one was watching. 99 years old. A son promised within the year. The most impossible thing he had ever been told, spoken in the most matter-of-fact possible way by the same voice that had told him to leave Ur all those decades ago. He had fallen on his face and laughed when he heard it. Not mockery, just the honest, involuntary response of a man who understood the arithmetic of the situation and could not quite make it add up. He was sitting in the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, resting perhaps, thinking perhaps, doing the particular kind of nothing that the worst heat of a desert afternoon imposes on everyone equally, the young and the old, the faithful and the faithless, the man who had walked with God for decades and the man who had never thought about God at all. And then Abraham looked up. 3 men were standing in front of him. He had not heard them approach. There had been no sound of footsteps on the dry, cracked ground, the kind of sound that carries clearly in the stillness of midday heat. There had been no distant shape resolving slowly out of the heat haze, growing larger as it came nearer, the way travelers do when you watch them come across open ground. They were simply there, present, standing before him in the full blaze of noon, as if they had always been standing there and he had only just noticed. Something moved in Abraham in that moment, something that bypassed thought and went straight to action. He did not sit and consider who they might be, or where they had come from, or what they might want. He did not call for a servant to go and ask. He rose, and then he ran. The text says ran. This 99-year-old man, in the heat of the day, ran from the tent entrance to meet them. And when he reached them, he bowed himself to the earth, the full bow of the ancient world, a gesture of profound respect and welcome. And he said, "O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." A morsel of bread, a little water. The language of understatement that the ancient world used when it meant to offer everything. What Abraham actually did was something else entirely. He went into the tent to Sarah, moving quickly, with urgency, and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour. Knead it and make cakes." 3 seahs was not a small amount. It was enough flour to make bread for a feast, enough to feed many people well. And that was only the bread. He ran to the herd, ran again, this old man running in the heat, and he himself chose the calf. Not a servant sent to find something adequate. Abraham himself, going into the herd, looking at the animals, selecting the one that was tender and good. He gave it to a young man, who set about preparing it quickly, with the urgency that the host's manner communicated without words. And then Abraham stood beside them under the tree while they ate, the posture of a servant waiting on guests, the host making himself available, present, attentive, ready to bring more water if the cup needed refilling, ready to answer if a question was asked, simply there, in the way a good host is there. 3 strangers arrived without warning at the worst hour of the day, from a direction that had offered no warning of their coming, and Abraham had treated them as if they were the most important guests who had ever come to his tent. They ate the calf, the bread, the curds and milk. They ate in the shade of the ancient oaks, while the heat of the day pressed down on everything around them. And when they had finished, one of them asked a question. It was a simple question, the kind a guest might ask out of polite interest. But the way it was asked, the precision of it, the particular way the name was spoken, carried something underneath it that a simple question of polite interest does not usually carry. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Not, "Do you have a wife?" Not, "What is her name?" "Where is Sarah, your wife?" As if the name was already known, as if the question was not really a question about location, but about something else. Abraham said, "She is there, in the tent." And the voice said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." Sarah was listening. The text notes it the way you note a detail that is going to matter. The entrance was behind him, and Sarah was there at the tent entrance, and she heard. She was listening from just inside the fabric of the tent, in the thin strip of shade and shadow between the inside and the outside, close enough to hear everything and hidden enough to be, technically, somewhere else. She was very old. Abraham was very old. The years had moved through her body the way years move through every body, slowly at first, then all at once. She had been barren her whole life. The particular grief of that, the particular shape of a life lived without the child that everyone around you assumes is coming, the child that defines what a woman is in the world you live in, had been part of her since before she can remember in the story. And now she was 89. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah long ago. That door, if it had ever been open, was closed in every way that a body can close a door. And she heard, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." She laughed, not out loud, inside. A private laugh, the kind that escapes before you can stop it, that involuntary, internal sound that the body makes when something strikes it as so far beyond the edge of possible that the only honest response is to laugh. She laughed to herself and thought, "After I am worn out and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" It was an honest thought. It was the thought of a woman who had lived in her body for 89 years and knew what it could and could not do. It was the thought of a woman who had waited a very long time for a promise that had not arrived, and who had, perhaps, somewhere along the way, made her peace with the waiting by deciding that peace was the same as giving up. And the voice said to Abraham, not to Sarah, to Abraham, as if addressing the invisible audience she thought she was, "Why did Sarah laugh?" The question moved through the tent fabric as clearly as if there were no fabric there. She was found. The private laugh, the internal surrender to impossibility, the thought she had thought in the privacy of her own mind, heard. Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you, about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Not said as a rebuke exactly, said as a question, the kind of question that is also a statement, the kind that doesn't require an answer because the answer is already obvious to everyone in the conversation. A question that simply holds up a mirror and lets you see what you've been assuming. Sarah was afraid then. She denied it. "I did not laugh." He said, "No, but you did laugh." 3 words. Calm, certain. Not angry, just true. The laugh had been heard. The door she had privately closed had been noted, and the promise had been restated anyway, not modified, not conditional on her faith being perfect, not withdrawn because she had laughed. The same promise, the same time, the same certainty. Sarah shall have a son. The 3 visitors rose to leave. Abraham walked with them, the ancient gesture of honor, the host accompanying his guests to the road, making sure they knew they were valued until the last possible moment. They walked together toward the edge of the hill country, toward the place where the land opens up and you can look down into the valley below. And as they walked, something changed. One of the visitors spoke, and what he said was not quite addressed to Abraham and not quite addressed to anyone else, but seemed to arrive in the space between them as if Abraham was meant to hear it without being spoken to directly. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what Yah has promised him. And then turned outward toward the valley below. Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. The 2 other visitors turned. They walked away down the road toward the valley, toward Sodom, toward the cities on the plain that had been named in this story before, always with the same quiet notation attached to them like a shadow.
The men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Lot was living there. The valley that had looked like the garden of the Lord was down there below the hill in the late afternoon light, and Abraham remained standing before the Lord. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary exchanges in the entire Bible, not because of what it reveals about Sodom, but because of what it reveals about Abraham, and about the kind of relationship that had grown between this man and God over the decades since a voice had found him in Haran and told him to go.
He began to speak. "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" He was negotiating with God on behalf of a city that was not his, full of people he had no particular obligation to, not demanding, not accusing, negotiating, the way a man negotiates when he has a relationship with the person across from him, when he knows the other party well enough to make an argument and expect it to be heard. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? It was an appeal to God's own character. You are the judge. Justice is what you do, and justice does not put the righteous to death with the wicked. The Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous in Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake." Abraham took a breath. "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes." He knew what he was doing. He knew the gap between himself and the one he was speaking to. Dust and ashes, the most honest assessment of what a human being is in the face of the eternal. And knowing it, naming it, he kept going anyway. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? He said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." 45. Abraham let that settle for a moment. Suppose 40 are found there. He said, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there." He said, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." "Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there." He said, "For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it." "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again, but this once. Suppose 10 are found there." He said, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking with Abraham. 10. The number had come down from 50 to 10 in 6 careful steps. Each one offered with the same apology for the audacity of asking. Each one received and answered. Abraham had walked the negotiation as far as he dared. He stopped at 10, perhaps because he thought 10 was a safe number, surely a reachable number, a number so small that any city of real size should be able to produce it without difficulty. 10 righteous people in all of Sodom. He turned and went back to his place. The two visitors arrived at the gates of Sodom in the evening. Evening in an ancient city is a particular kind of time. The heat of the day has begun to release its grip. The gates, which have been open since dawn, are about to close for the night. People are moving, coming in from fields and pastures, heading home, gathering at the gate the way people gather in the last light of the day, because the gate is where the social life of the city happens, where news arrives and business is conducted and disputes are settled by the elders who sit there. Lot was sitting at the gate. He had been in Sodom long enough now to be one of the people who sat at the gate, which meant he was a man of standing, a man of community, a man who had built a life inside these walls. He looked up and saw two strangers, and something in him responded the way Abraham had responded on the hill, immediately, physically, with the urgency of a man who understands more than he could explain. He rose. He bowed himself with his face to the earth. He said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." They said it simply, without elaboration, perhaps testing something, perhaps giving Lot a choice, the choice to insist or to accept. Lot pressed them strongly. He would not let them stay in the square. Whatever he knew about his city, whatever he had seen in the years of living inside its gates, he would not let these two strangers spend the night in the open. He brought them to his house. He made them a feast, unleavened bread quickly prepared, the meal of a man who wanted his guests fed and settled and safe before the night deepened. Before they lay down, before the lamps were extinguished and the house settled into the quiet of night, the city found them. The men of Sodom surrounded the house. The text does not allow for ambiguity about this. It does not say some of the men, or a group, or many. It says, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, every male in the city, from the youngest to the oldest, surrounding the house of Lot in the darkness, pressing in from every direction, their voices rising in the night air with a demand that made the nature of the city's wickedness concrete and undeniable. "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Lot went out to them. He stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind him, placing his body between the crowd and the door, between the strangers inside and the city outside. It was a gesture of protection that was also a gesture of exposure. He had made himself the single point of contact, the only thing between two people and an entire city. What he said in response was desperate and wrong in a way that the text does not excuse or explain. It simply records. He offered his daughters. Two young women, his own children, offered to a crowd in the darkness as a substitute for the guests he was protecting. The crowd was not interested. "Stand back. This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." They pressed hard against Lot. They came near to break down the door. The sound of it, the weight of an entire city pushing against one door, one man in the darkness, is the sound of a place that has gone so far in a particular direction that there is no coming back. And then the two men inside reached out. They pulled Lot back through the door into the house. They struck the men at the entrance, every one of them, small and great, with blindness. Sudden, total, complete. The crowd that had been pushing and pressing and reaching for the door
was suddenly groping in absolute darkness, unable to find what was directly in front of them, wearing themselves out, searching for a door they could no longer see. The house was quiet, and in that quiet, the two visitors spoke to Lot with a directness that left no room for misunderstanding. "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it."
Lot went out into the blinded city. He found the men who were pledged to marry his daughters, his sons-in-law, or the men who would be his sons-in-law, young men who had built their futures around the assumption that Sodom would be there to build them in. He said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." They looked at him. This man who had come to their door in the middle of the night, wide-eyed, urgent, speaking about destruction. This man who had been their future father-in-law, a respected man of the gate, now standing in the dark, saying things that made no sense. He seemed to them to be jesting. The text gives them no more than that. They thought he was joking. They did not come. Lot went back to his house, back to the visitors, back to the only safe place in a city that was laughing at the warning. When morning came, when the sky in the east began to lighten from black to deep blue to the first pale suggestion of gold, the two visitors became urgent in a way they had not been before. "Up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here. Go, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." And Lot lingered. This is the detail that sits in the chest and stays there. The angels had told him the city was about to be destroyed. He had seen what they had done to the crowd outside his door, an entire city struck blind in an instant. He had gone to his sons-in-law with the warning and come back alone. His daughters were inside. His wife was inside. Everything he needed to survive was inside. And he lingered. Perhaps it was the weight of everything else, the house, the years, the possessions accumulated over a lifetime of living in this valley, in this city, behind these walls, the business connections, the social standing, the chair at the gate, the life that had seemed like wisdom when he lifted his eyes from the hilltop and chose the best land. All of it was here. All of it would be gone the moment he walked through the gate. He lingered. And then the two men, the text drops the word angel here, returns to the human word man, as if to emphasize the physical reality of what happened next, seized him by the hand, and his wife's hand, and the hands of his two daughters. The Lord being merciful to him, merciful to a man who was hesitating at the threshold of his own rescue, they brought them out by force. They took them by the hands, and they walked them out of the city, and they set them outside the walls. And one of them said, "Run. Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the valley. Go to the hills. Run." Lot said, "Not the hills. I am afraid of the hills. What if something overtakes me there? Look, there is a small city, close enough to reach quickly. Let me go there. It is only a little city. Can't I go there? And my life will be saved." He said, "I have granted you this also. I will not overthrow the city you have spoken of, but hurry. Escape there quickly. I can do nothing until you arrive." Therefore the name of that city was called Zoar, the little one. Named in the moment of crisis, named for the smallness of the favor that was asked. Not the hills, just the little city, just the nearest thing, just the minimum that would count as safety. They ran. The sun was rising. The light was coming up hard and golden over the hills to the east, throwing long shadows westward across the valley, hitting the walls of Sodom at a low angle that made everything look, for a moment, almost beautiful. The city in the early morning, the gates, the streets still quiet before the day began. The life that was there, in that moment, still intact. Lot ran toward Zoar. His wife ran with him. And somewhere on the road between Sodom and Zoar, on the flat plain of the valley in the growing morning light, with the city still visible behind them and the little city still visible ahead, she looked back. Just that. She turned her head. She looked at what was behind her. One glance toward the city, toward the house, toward the years, toward everything that was ending in whatever way it was about to end. And she became a pillar of salt. She stands there, in the text, fixed forever in that moment. 1 foot forward, 1 foot still back, face turned toward what she could not leave behind. A woman caught between the life she was running toward and the life she could not stop looking at. The Bible does not give her name. She is Lot's wife. She is a pillar of salt. She is the image of a choice. The choice to look back at the thing you were told not to look at, to turn toward the thing you were running from, preserved in the landscape of the plain as a permanent reminder of what that choice looks like. Lot did not look back. He kept running. He arrived at Zoar as the sun was fully up. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The phrasing is worth sitting with. Sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Not a natural disaster reported neutrally, not an earthquake or a volcanic event described in the language of geology. Sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The source named, the agent identified, the act attributed to the one who had told Abraham the night before that the outcry was great and the sin was very grave. He overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. Everything. The valley that had looked like the garden of the Lord when Lot lifted his eyes from the hill and chose it. The well-watered plain, the cities with their walls and gates and markets and houses, the streets that had been full of noise just hours before, the crops in the fields, the animals in their enclosures, all of it, in whatever span of time fire falling from the sky takes to complete its work, gone. 5 cities had stood in that valley. The names were known: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar. The little one, spared at the last moment because a frightened man asked for the smallest possible favor on the road out of the fire. 4 cities destroyed. The valley that had seemed like the best possible choice, the valley that had drawn Lot and so many others with the promise of abundance, was smoke and ash, and the particular silence that comes after something absolute has happened. Abraham rose early that morning. He went to the place where he had stood before the Lord, the same hill, the same overlook, the same place where the conversation had happened, where he had walked the number down from 50 to 10, and then gone home, believing that 10 would be enough. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. The smoke was rising from the land like the smoke of a furnace. Everywhere he looked, smoke. The columns of it climbing into the morning sky, bending slightly in whatever wind was moving at that height, spreading out at the top, the way smoke spreads when there is nothing to stop it. Below the smoke, nothing. Or rather, what was left after fire and sulfur had finished. He had asked for 10. 10 righteous people found in Sodom would have been enough to spare the city. He had walked the number down from 50 because he was afraid that 50 might be more than the city could produce. He had been trying to find the floor, the minimum, the smallest number that was still reachable. 10 had not been reachable. Abraham stood on the hill and looked at the smoke and understood, in the silence, what that meant. But the text, which has just described the total destruction of multiple cities and the death of every person in them, adds one more sentence. It comes quietly, almost gently, tucked in after the horror, like a hand placed on a shoulder. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. God remembered Abraham, the man who had stood on the hill the evening before and negotiated, who had walked the number down from 50 to 10 with the care and respect of a man who understood both the importance of what he was asking and the gap between himself and the one he was asking, who had gone home believing that surely 10 could be found. His prayer had not saved the city. The city was smoke. But his prayer had not been forgotten. Lot, the nephew who had chosen the best land and walked away, who had pitched his tent towards Sodom and then moved inside its gates, who had sat at its gate and become one of its men, walked out alive. Not because of his own righteousness, because God remembered the man who had asked. Lot did not stay in Zoar. The Bible says he was afraid to stay in Zoar. Afraid of what exactly it does not say. Perhaps of the people there, strangers, people who did not know him, people who might have watched the smoke rising from the plain and drawn their own conclusions about the man who had arrived from that direction just as the fire started. Perhaps simply afraid, the way a person is afraid when the ground they trusted has turned out to be the kind of ground that burns. He went up out of Zoar and into the hills, the same hills he had been afraid of an hour before, the hills he had specifically asked to be spared from, the hills he had said he could not reach safely. Now he climbed them. Because Zoar, the little city he had begged for, no longer felt safe enough. He lived in a cave, he and his 2 daughters. His wife was a pillar of salt on the plain below. His sons-in-law were ash in the ruins of Sodom. His house was gone. His standing at the gate was gone. The years of building a life in the valley, the wealth and the community and the identity that came from being a man of the city, gone. All of it, in a single morning. He lived in a cave, and the Bible, which has been following Abraham for chapters now with the promise and the covenant and the stars and the fire, lets Lot's story end here, in a cave in the hills, with 2 daughters and the smoke of the valley still visible in the distance. The man who had lifted his eyes and seen the best land and taken it, living in a cave in the hills above the place where the best land used to be. In the next episode, the impossible keeps happening. Sarah conceives. Isaac is born into a family that had stopped believing birth was possible. There is laughter again, but a different kind of laughter than the kind Sarah laughed in the tent. And then, when the son is old enough to walk beside his father up a mountain, God asks Abraham for something that seems to contradict everything he has ever promised. He asks for Isaac back.